I have spent most of my life watching people make one decision that looks rational on paper and tragic in hindsight. They keep working long after they have already won. Not because they are broke. Not because they truly need the next paycheck to survive. Not because the math demands it. They keep working because the habit of accumulation is hard to break. Because a larger number feels safer than an invisible future. And because almost nobody teaches you that there comes a point when earning more money starts costing you something far more valuable than money. It costs you the strongest years you still have left. That trade is easy to miss when you are younger. In your 30s and 40s, the bargain feels obvious. You exchange time, effort, and stress for capital. You are short on money. So working harder makes sense. You are building, you are climbing, you are converting ability into assets. That is a reasonable game. But the rules change later, and many intelligent people never notice that the board has changed under their feet. There comes a stage of life when the problem is no longer how to accumulate enough. The problem becomes whether you have the wisdom to stop sacrificing life for a pile of reserves you may never fully use. That is the difference between building wealth and serving it. I want to talk about that turning point, because I have seen too many people arrive at it and walk right past it. They tell themselves they are being prudent. They tell themselves they are only staying a little longer. They tell themselves one more bonus, one more vesting cycle, one more year of maxing everything out, one more year to feel completely certain. And then the years move, the energy softens, the joints complain. The easy confidence of good health turns into management. Travel becomes more tiring. Recovery takes longer. The things they said they would do when they finally had freedom start requiring more planning, more medication, more compromise, more luck. By the time they turn toward life is no longer standing in the same place waiting for them. That is why I think the most expensive financial mistake in late career is not a bad stock pick, not a tax inefficiency, not even a lousy annuity contract. It is staying in the game after you no longer need the prize. I have met people who say, "Warren, I feel like if I retire now, I am cannibalizing my savings." I understand the emotion behind that sentence. For 40 years, they watched the number rise. Discipline meant adding, not withdrawing. Progress meant accumulation. Safety meant not touching principle. Their identity as a capable adult got tied to the act of producing and storing. So when the day finally comes when the money is supposed to do its job, using it feels backward. But that is exactly what the money is for. The purpose of saving is not to die undefeated by your brokerage statement. The purpose of saving is to buy back your time, while time is still worth buying. If your plan works, the money is supposed to replace the labor. That is not failure. That is the mission being completed. I think many people secretly behave as if retirement were a kind of financial loss, because they stop contributing and start withdrawing. They focus on the account balance, moving down in certain years, and forget to ask the only question that matters: what did I build this for? If the answer is freedom, then refusing to use the freedom, because it looks different on a spreadsheet, is a very peculiar victory. You do not get points for preserving every dollar while your strongest years quietly expire. People also make another mistake. They assume that because they are healthy now, they will remain healthy on the timeline. Their imagination prefers. Human beings are wonderfully optimistic about their future energy. If you feel good at 55, it is easy to project that condition forward and picture yourself hiking, traveling, lifting grandchildren, staying mentally sharp, staying physically adventurous, all the way into your 70s or 80s. I hope that happens for many people. But hope is not a strategy, and biology does not sign contracts. A lot can change faster than people expect. Aging does not move in a straight line. For many people, it comes in visible steps. 1 year, you are postponing the good life because you think you have all the runway in the world. A few years later, you begin editing the dream. The big walking trip becomes a shorter trip. The late-night dinners become afternoons. The ambitious travel list turns into the hobbies that once looked like future joys turn into things you used to mean to try. You never feel that shift coming as early as it comes. That is why late career work has to be judged differently from early career work. When you are 28, another 5 years of work may be a terrific investment. When you are 60, another 5 years can be an extraordinarily expensive purchase. The price is not only measured in hours, it is measured in the quality of the hours you surrender. It is measured in vitality, it is measured in flexibility, it is measured in how much of your retirement you will experience while your body and mind can still fully participate in it. Money compounds? Yes, but so does delay. I like to think of retirement as a balance among 4 resources. First resource, time second resource, money, third resource, health, fourth resource, energy. Most people spend the first half of adulthood short on one and rich in the others. They have time, health, and energy, but not enough money. So they make the sensible trade. They use the first three to build the fourth. Nothing wrong with that. The danger shows up when the fourth resource finally becomes adequate. But the person keeps sacrificing the first three, as if the old equation still applied. That is the heart of the problem. If you already have enough money to support the life you actually want, then continuing to work is no longer simply an act of accumulation. It becomes an act of conversion in reverse. You are trading non-renewable assets for renewable ones. You are giving up time, health, and energy to collect more of the one thing you may already have in sufficient quantity. That trade can be rational if there is a deeply personal reason. Some people love the game. Some people truly enjoy their work. Some people want the structure, the social environment, the challenge. Fine. A freely chosen life is a good life. But too many people are not choosing. They are drifting. They are being carried by habit, fear, social approval, and the vague superstition that there is no such thing as enough. Enough is one of the hardest words in finance because once you understand it, the whole machinery of unnecessary striving loses some of its power. Enough does not mean reckless. Enough does not mean imprecise. Enough does not mean ignore inflation, ignore taxes, ignore sequence risk, ignore longevity. Enough means you have done the arithmetic honestly, and you are no longer pretending that perfection is required before permission can be granted. A lot of the confusion comes from retirement rules that were meant to protect people, but often end up frightening them into oversaving or overworking. The most common example is the habit of turning retirement into a single conservative percentage and then building an entire life around not violating it. The public version of the conversation usually goes like this. Figure out what you want to spend, multiply by 25, maybe adjust around the edges, and do not even think about freedom until the resulting number appears. It sounds neat. It sounds disciplined. It sounds scientific. And like many neat formulas, it gets treated as truth long after people forget what it was designed to do. The problem is that many rules of thumb are engineered to survive terrible historical sequences with a very high margin of safety. They are built like bridges designed to handle far more weight than most travelers will ever place on them. That is admirable engineering. But when ordinary people use those frameworks without context, they often conclude that anything less than extreme certainty is irresponsible. So they keep working, they keep postponing, they keep buying more confidence with years of life. That is the hidden transaction. People think they are buying certainty with money. Very often they are buying it with time. And time is the one currency that does not refill. Once you see the trade clearly. Another truth becomes obvious. A retirement plan is not merely about maximizing the odds of never touching the edges. It is also about maximizing the lived value of the years you possess. A plan that leaves you with an enormous pile of unspent wealth after spending down your youth of old age may look excellent in a spreadsheet and poor in reality. I would rather think about retirement the way a rational allocator should think about any resource. I want sufficiency with flexibility. I want a margin of safety, yes, but not a margin so excessive that it devours the thing it was built to protect. Suppose a person could retire at 59 and a half instead of 65, not by fantasy, not by carelessness, but by using a more adaptive view of spending, taxes, social security timing, portfolio structure, and actual lifestyle needs. What are those 5.5 years worth? On paper, perhaps they are worth some foregone salary, some missed contributions, some larger final balance. In human terms, they may be worth the most mobile, most curious, most adventurous, most mentally fresh years of the entire retirement window. That is an astonishing bargain to throw away casually. The age of 59 and a half matters psychologically for another reason. For many people, it is the first age at which large retirement accounts stop feeling like locked vaults and start feeling like usable capital. Before that point, certain withdrawals can bring penalties. After that point, the psychological fence comes down. The money becomes more accessible. And with accessibility comes a new question. If I can use these assets now without the old penalty, why am I still acting as if every dollar is forbidden? That question unsettles people because it forces them to confront whether work is still a necessity or merely an inherited reflex. I do not claim that everyone should retire the moment they cross that age. That would be silly. Circumstances differ. Spending differs. Family obligations differ. Pension rights differ, health coverage matters, debt matters, skill and satisfaction matter. What I am saying is that somewhere around that stage, many people ought to perform a much more serious audit than they do. Not an audit of whether they can squeeze out one more point of return, an audit of whether continued work is still serving their life, or whether their life has quietly become subordinate to their fear. Fear deserves attention because it is often the real employer long after the company stops being necessary. People tell themselves they are worried about the market, but what they often mean is that uncertainty gives them an excuse to avoid making a life transition they do not feel emotionally prepared for. They tell themselves they cannot retire because interest rates are strange, because inflation is high, because politics are unstable, because the market feels toppy, because the economy is confusing. I have been around markets long enough to tell you that there is always a reason to postpone if your true standard is emotional comfort. There is always an election. There is always a recession possibility. There is always a war somewhere. There is always a headline that can be recruited to justify delay. If your entire retirement decision rests on finding a perfect climate, you are building your future on an event that has never existed. The world is always untidy. That is not a bug in the system, that is the system. A sound plan has to be built to function through changing conditions. Not only during ideal conditions, markets fluctuate, rates move, inflation surprises, tax law evolves. That is why rigidity is dangerous and adaptability is valuable. If your spending is thoughtful, your portfolio is sensible, your cash flow sources are layered, and your expectations are rooted in reality, then you do not need to win a timing contest in order to leave work with dignity. The obsession with waiting for the perfect moment often masks another fear. Identity. A person who has been productive, respected, scheduled, needed, and rewarded for decades does not merely leave a paycheck behind when retiring. He leaves a structure, he leaves a role, he leaves a story about who he is. That can be frightening. I have seen people who were financially ready years earlier than they admitted, but psychologically they were still standing at the doorway, unable to picture a life without meetings, metrics, routines, business cards, and the quiet ego nourishment that comes from being the one others rely on. They were not asking, can I afford to retire? They were asking, who will I be when I do? That is a different question, and money does not answer it. This is where many retirement conversations become too narrow. Advisors talk about balances, rates, projections, Monte Carlo charts, tax brackets, and healthcare costs. All of that matters. But the biggest source of delay for many people is not mathematics. It is the absence of a believable vision for daily life after work. If you cannot picture the next chapter clearly, you will cling to the current one even after it stops being necessary. So the work of preparing for retirement is not only financial, it is personal. You need an answer for what your days will feel like. You need an answer for where your sense of usefulness will come from. You need an answer for how you will keep your relationships warm, your mind engaged, your body moving, your calendar meaningful, and your freedom from collapsing into emptiness. The people who retire will usually do not retire into nothing. They retire into something. Sometimes that something is travel. Sometimes it is part-time mentoring. Sometimes it is grandparenting done generously instead of in rushed fragments. Sometimes it is volunteer work. Sometimes it is building furniture in the garage, learning local history, restoring an old car, taking long walks with no clock in the background, reading deeply again, teaching, writing, gardening, fishing, visiting old friends, finally seeing the places they postponed for decades. The activity matters less than the orientation. You need a life that pulls you forward more strongly than the office pulls you backward. Without that, work remains the default answer, because default answers are easy. I have never been impressed by defaults. A life deserves more deliberate thinking than that. Let me put it bluntly. I have heard far more people regret waiting too long than I have heard regret leaving too early, when the finances were in shape. Almost nobody says, I wish I had spent 5 more healthy years inside conference rooms so I could have died with a slightly larger account balance. But many people say some variation of the same sorrow. I thought I had more time. I should have gone earlier. I should have listened when my body was still cooperating. I should have traveled when getting around felt effortless. I should have spent more ordinary Tuesdays with the people I loved while everybody was still here and able. That regret is painful because it cannot be refinanced. No portfolio can restore a missed season of life. People also underestimate how much flexibility solves. They imagine retirement as a fixed spending promise that must be maintained under all conditions without adjustment. That is not how intelligent households actually live. Most people adapt. They spend more in some years and less in others. They postpone a purchase. They travel shorter one year and longer the next. They shift gifting. They alter withdrawal order. They trim around the edges when markets are poor. They claim benefits differently. They simplify housing. They make tax-smart moves. They remain responsive. A flexible retiree is not the same creature as a rigid model in a simple formula. That difference matters. It means many people can retire responsibly sooner than they think, provided they stop demanding impossible certainty and start building intelligent adaptability. Notice the word responsibly. I am not making a case for fantasy. I am not telling people to ignore health care before Medicare eligibility, or to neglect long-term care possibilities, or to assume markets only rise, or to dismiss inflation as a footnote. Those are serious matters. I am making a case against lazy pessimism disguised as prudence. Real prudence is not hoarding optional years of labor out of fear. Real prudence is understanding your numbers, your range of outcomes, your spending behavior, your tax exposure, your healthcare bridge, your family priorities, and your emotional readiness, then making a conscious decision, instead of a habitual one. That is adult judgment. The process, in my view, should be more comprehensive than most people make it first. Determine what life actually costs, not what anxiety imagines it costs. Many households spend loosely during working years because income is high and time is low. Retirement changes both. Some costs fall, commuting falls, payroll taxes may fall, savings contributions stop, work wardrobes shrink, restaurant spending can change, other costs rise, travel may rise, healthcare may rise, family support may rise. The point is that you need reality, not guesswork. Second, identify the income layers, Social Security, pension, if any. Dividends and interest, required or planned withdrawals, taxable assets, retirement accounts, part-time income if desired, not required. The more clearly you understand where the dollars come from, the less mysterious retirement feels. Third, think carefully about taxes. Many households save diligently for decades and then treat withdrawal strategy like an afterthought. That is sloppy. Which account you draw from when you claim benefits, whether you do Roth conversions in lower income years, how you manage capital gains, all of that affects sustainability far more than many people realize. Fourth, build a healthcare plan before you congratulate yourself. Retiring before traditional milestones may require private coverage, exchange plans, bridge strategies, or special employer arrangements. That piece must be faced squarely. Fifth, create a life plan with almost as much seriousness as the money plan. Not because every hour needs to be scheduled, but because an empty freedom frightens people back into unnecessary employment. 6. Stress test the plan, not to chase a fantasy of certainty, but to understand the range. What happens if inflation runs hotter? What if markets disappoint early? What if a spouse needs more care? What if spending rises temporarily? The point of stress testing is not to talk yourself out of retiring. The point is to know the levers you can pull. 7th, decide what enough looks like in language. Simple enough to say aloud, not a mystical number, a real statement. We can fund our life, absorb reasonable shocks, remain flexible, and preserve dignity without selling more healthy years than necessary. If you can say that honestly, you are closer than you think. A strange thing happens when people do this work properly. Their fear does not always vanish, but it becomes manageable. Instead of one giant fog called retirement, they see components: income, taxes, healthcare, housing, purpose, contingencies, spending flexibility. Once the fog breaks into pieces, the mind stops treating the whole future as a monster. That is useful because fear thrives in vagueness. Clarity weakens it. I also think there is moral value in using your freedom while you still have the strength to enjoy it. Not selfish value, moral value. Your spouse gets more of you. Your children, if they are fortunate enough to still have you, get a more present version of you. Your friends get your unhurried company. Your community may get your time and experience. You get the chance to live days that are not perpetually deferred. There is something sad about spending the best years of later life in a pattern designed for an earlier necessity. At some point, discipline should graduate into wisdom. Wisdom knows when to stop. Some people hear all this and think I am attacking work. I am not. Useful work is honorable. Productive effort is a blessing. I have worked because I enjoyed the game. But there is a major difference between continuing from joy and continuing from unexamined fear. Joy expands life. Fear shrinks it. That is why the decision deserves honesty. Ask yourself a few uncomfortable questions. If my account balance never grew meaningfully from here, but it remained enough, would I still keep working? If markets were calm and headlines were cheerful, would I still invent reasons to delay? If I were guaranteed my current health for only 5 more years, how would I spend them? If I retired and my identity felt shaky for 6 months, would that really be worse than giving away 6 more health? If my children described my life 10 years from now, what would I want them to say I valued? Those answers tell you more than any slogan. The tragedy is not that some people choose to work longer. The tragedy is that many do so by default, then later call the result bad luck. It was not bad luck. It was an unchallenged assumption. The central assumption goes like this: more money is always safer than less, therefore more working is always wise. That sounds reasonable until you place time, health, and energy back into the equation. Then it becomes obviously incomplete. Safety is not only about maximizing assets, safety is also about not arriving at freedom too late to use it well. I would rather have a retirement with thoughtful flexibility and a living body than a fortress of excess, built on years I can never recover. That is my bias, and I think it is the rational bias. If you are approaching the late 50s or early 60s, you are not merely deciding about employment. You are deciding what your remaining healthy years are for. That question is much larger than finance. Money is a tool. Work is a tool. Schedules, titles, offices, and routines are tools. None of them are the point. The point is life, and life is not measured only by duration. It is measured by aliveness. When I look at people who navigated this, well, I notice they usually did 3 things. They were financially literate enough to know the difference between enough and excess. They were psychologically honest enough to admit that fear was part of the picture. And they were imaginative enough to build an appealing future instead of merely escaping a current job. That combination is powerful. Financial adequacy without emotional readiness leads to delay. Emotional eagerness without financial realism leads to trouble. You need both. But when both are in place, you do not owe the world endless labor just because labor became your habit. You are allowed to cash in the chips for what they were supposed to buy. Freedom is not an accounting error. It is the dividend of a life spent preparing. So if you have built well, if you have run the numbers, honestly, if you have accounted for healthcare, taxes, spending, flexibility, and purpose, then do not keep moving the finish line just because uncertainty still exists. Uncertainty always exists. What disappears is not uncertainty. What disappears is time. That is the whole game. A few extra points of confidence may cost you the exact years you were trying to protect. A few extra years of salary may purchase a larger inheritance for somebody else while stealing the strongest chapter of retirement from you. A few more years of delay may feel harmless because they pass 1 quarter at a time, 1 annual review at a time, 1 vesting date at a time, 1 market cycle at a time. But life is not lost in dramatic chunks. It is usually lost in reasonable postponements. That is why I want people to notice the turn when it arrives. Not when the doctor delivers bad news, not when travel becomes exhausting, not when a spouse can no longer do the things you once promised each other, not when grandchildren are suddenly older and your chance to know them in that earlier season has passed. I mean earlier than that, at the moment when the money is already capable of carrying its share, and you are still healthy enough to live expansively. And the only thing stopping you is the old reflex to accumulate. That is the moment worth respecting. Because once you cross it, your job is no longer to prove you can keep earning. Your job is to decide whether you have the courage to live. I think that is the real threshold. Not a marketing slogan, not a magic formula. A threshold of judgment before it. Work builds the option after it. Wisdom is knowing whether to exercise the option. Many people never do. They die still negotiating with a future that was already funded. Do not make that bargain accidentally. Build carefully. Plan intelligently. Leave room for adaptation. Stay honest about fear. Give serious thought to purpose. Protect your health. Respect your energy. Understand your taxes. Know your income layers. Stress test your assumptions. Define enough. Then, when the numbers and the life both say yes, stop treating retirement like a betrayal of discipline. It is discipline fulfilled. The money did not ask to be worshipped, it asked to be useful. And its highest use, once you truly have enough, is to return your days to you, while your days can still be lived fully. That is the investment I would not postpone lightly. Because in the end, the richest outcome is not finishing with the highest balance. It is reaching the stage of freedom in time to enjoy the life your discipline made possible.